So we've already been in the book of Ephesians for a couple of months, and we're getting such a strong sense for the tone the Apostle Paul is using as he speaks. And he's just doing this like earth-shatteringly groundbreaking language about how the world is so different for those who have come to Christ. You know, he's talking about that they're adopted as sons. They've been lavished with the grace of God, that God's Spirit himself has come in them to live and given them a new hope, brought them life, and now they're his masterpieces. And it's that kind of a background, this like life-changing relational stuff that's happening when we come to the passages in Ephesians 5 and 6 about families. We've already heard that this work in Jesus is bringing us together as a people of God, taking those who were far from God and bringing them near, and having those who already knew God connected in new ways to those who were far from God, the Jews and the Gentiles, bringing them together as one family. And this rupture of humankind is being mended. And now those who are far are near with a new kind of confidence. So you hear the power in his tone and the joy in his tone and the newness and the things that are happening. I mean, it's like just freakishly beautiful, this new vision of humanity. And this is nothing like Rome. Let's talk about Rome in first century Palestine in Paul's day, so you can get a sense for how it was. Rome was really all about power and order. Rome's biggest fear was an uprising, people out of control. And Rome was the epitome of military control, so that like even today, we and other nations will often model their military after like what were initially Roman ideas. And control became basically the morality of the day. They were the ultimate control freaks, and that control extended into families. So when I say families, I mean like families like with a capital F, you know, like grandma and grandpa are living out back and Uncle Jeb is running the family business. Even the household slaves were considered part of the, you know, so-called family. It's called the paterfamilia, and it meant the family arranged itself under a specified order of authority. That's where we get that really cool expression from the movie Oh Brother, you know. I am the paterfamilia, he says, when he tries to like get back together with his wife and she's hooked up with another guy at this point. He tries to assert his authority with that expression. So right, this is the Roman idea. The ruler is the ruler, the follower is the follower, and everybody gets into their places. And here's how we know. Listen to the influential figures from that day, or influential prior to that day even, address this issue. So Didymus summarized Aristotle. Sounds really boring, okay, but I want you to think about this for a minute. He summarized Aristotle for Julius Caesar. So, you know, Didymus is like, okay, I'm going to take the teachings of Aristotle. I'll sum them up for the ruler of the world. So he does. And he sums it up like this. He says, hey, okay, Caesar, you want to know what Aristotle said? This is what he said. A man has the rule of his household by nature. For the deliberative faculty in a woman is inferior. In children, it doesn't exist. And in the case of slaves, it's completely absent. Those were the thoughts in that day, okay? Socrates maintained the same thing. He said that the courage of a man is shown in commanding a woman and obeying. And all classes are deemed to have their special attributes. So there's this classism, there's this sexism, there's this strong sense of control. And for a man like to maintain his household, that was the epitome of virtue. So this is the cultural aroma that we find ourselves in, and it's really pervasive. It's so pervasive that people like live by these codes. Like if you go into a home, it's going to say, hey, in this home, the wives listen to the husbands, or the husbands manage their wives, and the masters manage their slaves, and the fathers' children obey him. So it's kind of like, you know, like when we walk into our houses, we have those little signs that say, as for me and my house, we serve the Lord. This is sort of like the thing that gets said all around Rome. It is the It's the epitome of morality. Okay, now this is important. So pay attention or you won't understand anything else that I'm going to say. The format for these codes always goes like this. First, you address the person in power and you affirm their role. Husbands should be over their wives. Fathers should manage their children. Masters control their slaves. It's about order and control. It's commendable. It's good. So now, knowing what we know about how these codes usually go, and knowing what we know about how Paul has been just now speaking to the church in his letter, let's read it again. And let's pay attention for the surprising thing that Paul is about to do. Let me start on the section about slaves. The section about slaves. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with respect and fear, and with sincerity of heart, just as you would obey Christ. Obey them not only to win their favor when their eye is on you, but like slaves of Christ, doing the will of God from your heart. Serve wholeheartedly as if you were serving the Lord. Can you hear it? Can you hear something happening here? Paul is doing something absolutely revolutionary here. It's hard for us to hear it because we're offended by the language in the first place, as we should be. He is breaking all the rules about talking about rules. Hear how he breaks them. First, he actually addresses the less powerful person. Never did anybody write to a slave or address a slave about how they were going to treat a master. This is not how you do it. But here's Paul. Not only does he address slaves and wives and children, but he addresses them first. Trust me, this is not how it's done in Rome. It's as if he's giving a new kind of dignity to the powerless. Now, let's look at the second revolutionary thing that he does. I'll read it about children. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you, and that you may enjoy long life on earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. See, after he addresses the less powerful person first, in this case the child, with their expected role in society, he then turns to address the powerful person, not to bolster their power, but with an attitude of correction. Fathers, do not exasperate them. You know, exasperate, that means like make them breathe heavy, you know, like you're losing your mind. Don't put your children in a position where they're losing their minds with you. If they're stuck having to live under you and your authority, for God's sakes, don't make it so hard on them. Because living in a condition where you have so little control over what's happening in your life, I mean, like, look at kids. They don't get to decide what they're going to wear. They don't decide what they're going to eat. They don't get to decide how many days it's going to be between now and Halloween. They don't decide anything. They don't decide anything. And that's really hard. So if you have to be the one with that much control, for God's sakes, watch your heavy-handed attitude and have mercy on the little ones and help them not to lose their minds with all the uncertainty and confusion that they have to live with. Don't exasperate them. Okay, so let's review. First, he elevates the powerless, speaking to them directly. Secondly, he does not bolster their authority, the authority of the powerful, but rather he gives them a strong corrective to watch their attitude as they operate with authority. And now last, thirdly, he roots this attitude correction in the most profound and beautiful truth. He roots it in the sacrificial love of Jesus and the mystery that the God of the universe actually unites with us for all eternity. Let that settle in for a minute. Remember all the things Paul has already been talking about in Ephesians, like crazy, lavish love, the mending of humanity, the indwelling of the Spirit. And just before this part in Ephesians, he's talking about coming together with joy and singing in oneness. And the God of all power unites his spirit with us, little peons, little tiny people who deserve nothing. He unites with us in the death and resurrection of Christ. He makes us one. And so now Paul is going to help us understand exactly what kind of attitude we are to approach our relationships with. What is that attitude? Let's read about it in the Word to wives and husbands. Wives, submit to your husbands as to the Lord, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church, his body, of which he is the Savior. Now, as the church submits to Christ, so also wives should submit to their husbands in everything. Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself. After all, no one ever hated his own body, but he feeds and cares for it, just as Christ does for the church, for we are members of his body. Okay. Do you hear in this passage the tenderness? Have you ever washed your spouse's body or your child's body? Paul is speaking in the most intimate and tender kind of language, and it's very sacrificial language. So just recently we were in California, and my husband was in quarantine, and when he finally felt well enough with his COVID to walk outside for a little bit, we went out to a park where there were a bunch of cactuses, and for a brief moment he had a second of energy and joy and decided to embed himself in a cactus for a picture taking opportunity, only the cactus embedded itself in him instead. And so we ended up back at the hotel room with me picking out these tiny little cactus spines that were like miniature fiber optic cables. Okay, that's something just a wife does. Okay, this is the language of closeness, intimacy, and sacrifice. And I cannot help also but think about the women who washed Jesus's body after he was taken from the cross, with every kind of blood and filth drying on his body. But surely he is washed. An act that restored his dignity, an act of hope for the resurrection, and his sacrifice is pure and without blemish. In our closest relationships, do we uphold the dignity of the one that we love? Do we help take away their disgrace and embarrassment? Do we help present them to others in their best light with our highest hopes? See, when we grasp for the power in relationships, it's about making ourselves look good, seeking our own comfort, getting our own way. It's the exact opposite of submitting. The opposite of submitting is to grasp, to fight, to get entrenched and stubborn about having your own way. Now, I want to pause for a moment and address the fact that this passage has often been used to talk about gender roles. I know this. I was actually at the house of Dan Fuller and John Piper talking about gender roles and the role of women in ministry. I know how these things went. I studied the issue quite fully very early on in my marriage. But what I'm sharing with you today is how my own thinking has changed from those earlier days. This is not a sermon arguing about the role of women. It's not a sermon about that because it's not a passage about that. See, if we come to this passage asking if it's reinforcing gender roles, we are asking entirely the wrong question. It's a passage about turning your relationships upside down and inside out and living completely differently in love as one. And we make this passage about whether God intended us to like stay in our places, stay in our lane. We're really torturing it and we're making it say things that it isn't saying. It would be a little like if you did this. Let's just imagine that you decided to bring in one of the orphans who's just recently arrived from Afghanistan, and you say, I'm bringing you into my home. I will be your father. I will be your mother. And look, here you will be free. Here you will have your mind stretched. Here you're going to be a daughter to me and you'll eat with this family. You can have my PIN number. Here's my credit card. If anything's wrong with you, I'm taking you over to U of M for the best medical care in the world. Here's my cell phone. Call me anytime you need me. That's what Ephesians sounds like, okay? That's what Ephesians sounds like. But imagine then you turn when things maybe get a little difficult and you say, hey, my little adopted child, don't get all uppity and imagine that you're anything equal to my other kids. Don't imagine you're actually going to have a say in anything that goes on in this family. See, this, I think, is the mistake that we make reading Paul in Ephesians. We jump into this section about how to behave in social units and we start hunting for rules about behavior. Christians are really big on behaving. But that is not the thrust of this passage at all. See, I don't think it's a passage about gender roles. I think it's a passage about giving up your control. Imagine after you've been told to lay down your life, to sacrifice, to love again, and to love tenderly. If you then ask the question, okay, but like which one of us is in control like in the long run? Like what about this situation or that situation? Like who's in control at that point? See, that is asking completely the wrong question. The Apostle Paul is saying something so much more profound and powerful here. He shows us that Jesus is putting all powers and principalities under his feet, including those that plague relationships. Turn my light up. So I have some kind of, there we go. Whoa. All right. That was a little weird. Okay, including things that plague relationships. Those are the powers and the principalities that would be put under his feet. Do you realize that there are forces in this world that want you to mold your relationship into their image? The forces that tell you that you can have it all with no sacrifice. The forces that tell you that the best thing that can happen to you in this world is to be worshipped. Forces that tell you that all your energy should go into that interesting relationship at work because you deserve not to be bored. Remember what Rick told you. Jesus will not quit until every broken and deficient part of us is restored. When my nephew Luke was in the hospital, his mother was saving her breast milk for him. He couldn't nurse. She wasn't sure if he would ever nurse, and she and her husband were not sure he would even live. But you know what she did? She kept pumping her milk for the day when he would be able to take it. She pumped milk, and she waited for his healing. She pumped milk until her freezer was full. And I'm not talking about the little freezer. I'm talking about the deep freezer. And when that was done, she filled another one. What is sacrificial love going to look like in your family? And with your children, I know a lot of you. I know how you are with your children. I see how you sacrifice for them. I see you get up, get down, get up, get down. It's like the bang, bang, bang song, you know. You get interrupted and interrupted again. I see you waking up early to get your kids to church. And I pray for you that God will strengthen you to give and increase your ability to give even more. That's what the power from his Holy Spirit will do for you, because it takes that kind of power to work well with your children, because nobody ever said that they couldn't exasperate you. For a long time, Christians spent their time helping parents to regain authority that was supposedly lost in the 60s. We began talking about growing kids God's way, and we began to strengthen our authority muscles. And I'm not going to say there isn't a place for consistency and direction and family values that are life-giving, but I think we got the emphasis all wrong. I cannot tell you how often I see a teen in my counseling office who has been assaulted with the so-called love of Jesus in the form of authority. When I speak to you, I'm speaking as a person who has seen firsthand the damage that embracing this so-called God-given authority has done to some families. I've seen wives submit to their husbands, only rising up to protect their children once they found him kicking them on the floor. I've seen teens who literally cower and can't even sit up straight in the presence of their parents, who have used the Bible to endlessly nag their children until they no longer have any self-esteem. God help us if we use the name of Jesus in vain like that. You know, when Jesus spoke plainly about authority, it was like this. There was this man who came to him, and he said, Jesus, my servant, my slave is home sick, and I'm afraid that he's about to die. Come and heal him. And Jesus says, I will do it. I will come and heal him. And the man says, no, you can't come to my house. Don't come to my house. Just say the word, he says, because I'm a man under authority. I know how this works. I tell this one go, and he goes, and that one come, and he comes, and he says, just say the word, and he will be healed. And Jesus said, I have not seen faith like this in all of Israel. And we talk about that man's faith, the faith that he understood the authority of Jesus. But hold on just a second. He understood also what the authority was for. It was to heal his slave. It was to do good to those that are marginalized. It was to do good to those who were living on the edge. So my prayer for you is that your love will be like that. Seek out life for those that are under your care. Use your muscles to come running to Jesus for help with the things that are broken. Because being filled with the Holy Spirit expands your capacity to love and to live sacrificially. See, Ephesians is a book about getting power structures right. All life-giving power belongs to God. And he laid down his life in order to bring us to him. How dare we try to exert our own power to control the people that we love? You can hear this best when you read the section about slaves again. Masters, treat your slaves in the same way. Do not threaten them, since you know that he who is both their master and yours is in heaven, and there is no favoritism with him. Remember, God is no respecter of persons. He does not respect our wealth. He doesn't respect our image, our brand, our political power, or our sense of privilege over others. Instead, he calls us to use our wealth, use our power, use our skill sets, use our resources sacrificially to lift the dignity of others. When I was first married, my husband came to Michigan for our wedding, and he was the manager at a restaurant. And at that time, one of his employees was having difficulty getting to work. And my husband, not the kind of man to lord his authority over someone, rather than whine and complain to the employee about not being able to make it to work, he gave him a car. He said, take my car. I won't need it. I'm going back to Michigan. I'm getting married. Use my car to get into work this week. And we flew back from our wedding back to California to pick up our car, only it was gone, with $1,000 from the safe at the restaurant. The man had stolen our car, and in the process had stolen our honeymoon. I was annoyed, but I was learning about the kind of man that I married. No one said that sacrifice wouldn't cost you something. So we have new rules about power. New rules about what it looks like to be a parent, new rules about what it looks like to be in a marriage or to be in a relationship with people in our community as someone in authority at work or as just a person of privilege in our community. These new rules come from the 3 strange ways that Paul approaches household codes. Let's count. Rule 1, Jesus speaks to the weak and the powerless, and he lifts their dignity. Rule 2, Jesus corrects the harsh attitude of the powerful. Rule 3, Jesus is no respecter of power, not even his own. He gave it up for the good of the church, and he invites us into those kinds of relationships. Jesus puts the forces of greed and selfishness and irritability under his feet. See, he's won the relationship game. He has done the highest and best good for us. And now he calls us to live sacrificially as he did, to bend our relationships under the cross, knowing that he will finish the work he began and will make all things whole and right and good again. What will it look like for you to live a cross-shaped life?